I have concluded that person cannot be me. My role...
Another post-Brexit shocker after siding against David Cameron and campaigning successfully for Britain to leave the European Union. Former London Mayor Boris Johnson withdrawing his name from the competition to succeed Cameron as Conservative Party leader and Prime Minister. Hello everyone and welcome to the France 24 debate. It's chaos at Westminster after a day of, well, some might call it backstabbing, shifting alliances, reversals, and just as Boris didn't elaborate on reasons why he got cold feet, weren't quite sure why this morning fellow Brexiteer Michael Gove suddenly threw his hat in the ring. The Justice Minister faces a growing number of rivals for the Tory leadership, including Home Secretary Theresa May. Now, she's the early bookmakers' favourite, and here's the confusing bit. The electorate voted Leave, she endorsed Remain, but mostly stayed out of the campaign. Speaking of unenthusiastic Remain supporters, Labour leader Jeremy Corbyn insists he's not going anywhere, even though MPs from his own party want him out. Yes, Brexit is tearing apart both sides of the aisle. Never in recent memory has a Western democracy served up simultaneous leadership crises of these proportions on both sides of the aisle. Who can legitimately lay Britain? How will the Brexit vote redraw political fault lines? With us from New York, former Conservative Member of Parliament, Louise Mensch of news website. Thanks for being with us.
Thank you for having me.
Journalist Alex Taylor joins us here in the studio. Nice to see you.
Hi.
Welcome back to Jeremy Stubbs, President of the British Conservatives in Paris.
Hello.
And from London, the author of Debunking Economics. Always a pleasure to say hello to Steve Keen, who teaches at Kingston University. The France 24 debate, where you can join the conversation on Facebook and Twitter, our hashtag F24debate. Louise Mensch, why did Boris Johnson get cold feet?
I think because Michael Gove, who the Justice Secretary, now the leadership contender, who was running his campaign, spoke to him and decided that he could no longer support him. We don't know exactly why that is, but my very strong suspicions are that he didn't like what he heard from Boris Johnson in terms of how the Brexit will be negotiated. Perhaps he thought that Boris wanted to remain in the single market and accept freedom of movement or some other completely unacceptable outcome to the Leave side of the fence. So Michael Gove put his own hat in the ring, and as soon as he did that, all those of us who'd supported Boris Johnson for leadership, including myself, transferred immediately over to Michael Gove, who is Leaver in every cell in his body. He is for Brexit.
Yeah, because when we saw last Friday that first speech by Boris Johnson, it was a bit of a strange scenario. You'll recall that the day began on Friday with a beaming Nigel Farage of UKIP addressing reporters outside Parliament, and then Boris booed by hecklers as he leaves his home in central London. Louise Mensch, did Gove jump ship because they have differences when it comes to how you negotiate a Brexit? Or did they have differences simply because there's perhaps the feeling that Boris Johnson is unelectable?
No, certainly not. I mean, we saw Boris Johnson, and he is heroic. I'm very grateful to him, successfully leading our campaign to exit the European Union. A mob rule outside somebody's house means very little. We had a plebiscite. Boris was on the winning side.
But afterwards, when he when he gave that first statement, he didn't seem like a man who was enthusiastic, was celebrating. He didn't have that same smile that we saw the likes of Nigel Farage have.
Indeed, and of course Nigel Farage, it's important to say, was not the voice of the Leave campaign. He lost the battle to be the official designated head of Leave. That's very important. If I may just say, you're quite right, though, and I think that is why Michael Gove withdrew his support and why Boris Johnson had to stand down. He seemed insufficiently committed to really getting us out of Europe. That means no freedom of movement, no large payments. Tariff-free trade, yes, but the single market, no. We're not interested in taking Monsieur Juncker's terms. We shall do as we please.
Jeremy Stubbs, why did Boris get cold feet? I'll put the question to you.
Well, I think his feet were feeling distinctly chilly already last week. I don't believe he entirely expected to win. The problem is that although we've...
So he campaigned for Leave but didn't think really that Leave would win the day.
That is what is said, and it certainly explains the lack of immediate exhilaration and exuberance that one would have expected from a winner. And whether he pulled out today because he was going to anyway, or because Gove headed him off at the pass, I think that his legacy will be that of somebody who threw his hat in the ring, suddenly pulled it out, betrayed friends in the party, and was himself betrayed. So betrayal all round.
Nonsense.
Why are you saying that's nonsense?
Because Boris Johnson did a fine and upstanding thing. I understand that Romanians are upset about it, but I'm
not upset about it. It's just that he did not do something he actually believed in.
He did not betray
He didn't believe in it. He's pulled out.
Disagree with you.
He is a great big bloated wet
did agree
sock.
with it.
It's finished.
He's
gone. There's no point in defending him.
He won. He won, we won, we are going to Brexit. Michael Gove.
You don't look as if you're going to Brexit from New York, I must say.
Well, and are you going to Brexit from Paris? As you know, Monsieur, we are in fact British wherever we live in the world, and part of the point of Brexit was that there is life outside the European Union. It's all very well to pull
people out of the United Kingdom when you don't live there.
They like.
All right, Alex Taylor.
Makes no difference whatsoever. We're going to trade with America.
It doesn't to you, I know.
Alex Taylor, let me ask you, what do you think of Jeremy Stubbs' theory that he campaigned for Brexit without secretly wanting it?
Well, it seems obvious. I'm the only person here so far who's not part of the Conservative Party. I'm a journalist and watching this from the outside. If you actually Google Boris Johnson over the last few years, he's written quite a lot of very positive articles about the European Union in the past. Why did he do that if he was so vehemently opposed to the European Union as he has been over the last 2 months, since he suddenly decided at the very last minute to defend the out cause because he thought it was the best way possibly to give himself some kind of support for a campaign later to become Prime Minister. From the outside, this looks like a Shakespearean tragedy with a clown who was playing with the idea of becoming Prime Minister, was trying to whip up support, who didn't expect to win, and then when he was faced with the enormity, why has he not tweeted? Why have we not heard from him until today? Why was there silence? Somebody who wins a campaign like that, like Nigel Farage, was on all the TV studios 2-3 hours later, was in the European Parliament crowing about it in a quite disgraceful way. Why was Boris silent for 5 or 6 days? It's because I think Boris suddenly realised the enormity of what has happened, that we're going to take ourselves out of what? The biggest market, which is our neighbours, 500 million people. What are we going to do? And as for Louise Mensch saying that we're British all around the world, just irks, right. Because I'm British, just like you. I've been living here for some time. This referendum is possibly going to take away all my rights to health, to residency, to work. It's thrown my life in total turmoil.
Only if the European Union is vindictive.
Exactly. I just finished. And I didn't even have the right to vote, not a single vote in this referendum. And you talk about being British and living abroad and so forth.
If you've lived abroad for more than 15 years, you didn't have the right to vote.
We didn't have the right to vote in a referendum where we are the most affected people abroad. I can tell you, all of a sudden, my life is thrown into turmoil. I don't know if I fall ill in 2 months' time, if the French system is going to protect me anymore. We were affected more than anybody else by this, and we didn't even have a single vote.
All right, let's go over the timeline again.
Well, that is going to be up to France, is it not?
Can
we not trust the French as our allies to treat our citizens fairly, because EU citizens living in the UK
They've
will
treated
be
us fairly beforehand because we're in something called the European Union, where we have freedom of movement. It's a mutual agreement. If we as a country are withdrawing from the European Union, why on earth would France suddenly treat in its hospitals 400,000 British people who happen to be stranded here because our country was stupid enough to leave the European Union?
Because there are French people in the UK that will need reciprocal treatment. L'entente cordiale predates the EU. Our alliance with Portugal is very old.
It's what you're saying is not true.
We have friendly relations with our allies.
That's what you're saying.
The EU is not important.
Well, for somebody like me, I can tell you it is. And for somebody like me, I can tell you it is. I've based my whole life on being a European citizen. My father fought in the Second World War. I'm going actually tomorrow to do a programme in Picardy about the First World War. Hundreds of thousands of British soldiers in the First and the Second World War gave their lives to save this continent. I was so proud of my country that it did that.
Quite so.
For the last week, I can tell you, for the very first, if you can just finish, for the last week, I can tell you, for the first time in my life, if my country has started off this process where we're all going back to being nation states at war with each other, with tariffs with each other, falling out with each other, then for the first time in my life, for the last week, I've been ashamed of my country.
All right, let's go over.
Feel free to apply for French citizenship, because we are indeed going back to nation states and have just done so.
All right, let's go back over the timeline. As Jeremy Stubbs was saying, it seems as though Michael Gove cut the rug out from under Boris Johnson bright and early. The Justice Minister fires first with a statement, then later on in front of the cameras.
Boris is an amazing and an impressive person. But I've realised in the last few days that Boris isn't capable of building that team and providing that unity. And so I came reluctantly but firmly to the conclusion that, as someone who had argued from the beginning that we should leave the European Union, and as someone who wanted to ensure that a bold, positive vision for our future was implemented, that I had to stand for the leadership of the Conservative Party.
Steve Keen, what's your reaction to that statement?
Well, this wouldn't be the first time that a politician has called a referendum he didn't want to win. Remember, that's what Tsipras did. And I know that not just from comments in the press, but from Yanis Varoufakis saying when he burst into Tsipras's office, exultant that the Greek people had voted to reject the European Union's terms, he found a despondent office. There was clear Tsipras called that hoping to lose. Now, it's nothing quite so dramatic as Boris, and I don't normally pass on this sort of information, but he made a number of panic telephone calls which some people overheard and some people spoke in my ear. And it's clear, I would say, from that conversation that it's correct. He ran to stand out, he didn't run to win. And I'm sure that's what Gove is reacting to, where Gove actually had a set of reasons for wanting to leave. So it's true. It's a Shakespearean tragedy with a clown who's left the stage, and now we have to make a new act without him.
It's a strange pitch, Louise meant, because Michael Gove in that first statement says, I've repeatedly said I don't want to be Prime Minister. It's always been my view. And then he says, goes further on to say, I've come reluctantly to the conclusion that Boris cannot provide the leadership. Doesn't sound like his heart is in it, Louise Mensch, when it comes to running for Prime Minister.
You heard what he said. He said that duty calls. He said that he is a committed anti-EU, pro-Europe, anti-EU politician, and that somebody who is totally committed to the true Brexit vision of leaving the EU must be Prime Minister. And I know this is the day after the vote. I was down in the vote leave offices at 6 o'clock in the morning celebrating, and I asked Michael Gove-Spad if he wouldn't please run for Prime Minister. And at that time, she said he was determined not to. My good friend Jacob Rees-Mogg, leading Light MP, leading Light of the Leave campaign, texted Michael and asked him to run. His friends were pressing him to run. He believed that Boris was for a stronger vision of a post-Brexit England than he was. For example, Boris might wish the EEA model. I don't think many Brexiteers want the EEA model. We want a complete break from the EU, and that is the ideological reason that Michael Gove is stepping up reluctantly to do something that he doesn't necessarily want to do, but he will be fantastic at. All you need is Gove, and I'm pretty sure he's going to be Britain's next Prime Minister.
Steve
I
Keen?
think that's a fair summary, because, again, if I'd received the type of phone calls that I overheard from Boris, I'm sure Gove would have got gun at them. He would have thought, this isn't the person to lead us forward and make a reluctant move into the breach. So I think that's quite a sensible judgment that actually occurred in this instance, as theatrical as it might be.
Reactions on the hashtag F24 debate. Boris Johnson led the Brexit campaign, isn't running for leader. Theresa May, backed Remain, is now the favourite. Tories equal deeply confused party. Jeremy Stubbs, your reaction?
Well, we've heard that originally Michael Gove didn't want to be Prime Minister, and I feel sure that his original wish will be fulfilled and that he won't be. He is not likely to win this election. I'm not saying it's impossible, but it is less likely. There is a much stronger candidate out there who's Theresa May. And as we've seen, she was a rather lukewarm Remainer. She's a bit of a sort of in-the-middle sort of person. And it has to be said...
Because reporters said to her on the campaign trail, said, we didn't see you on the campaign trail. And she said, no, I was in Ireland campaigning. Yeah,
so quite the place to be. Quite the place to be. But the fact is, though, that the referendum is binding upon the government that launched that referendum. She was part of that government, so in a sense, it is the duty of somebody like her to carry out the wishes of the people. And she is seen by really most conservatives as they say, the phrase has become overused now, a safe pair of hands, which I think is exactly what is needed now. Somebody sober, somebody who has not changed sides or knifed anyone in the back recently. She's most likely to be the.
And let me ask you about Louise Mensch saying that it's a question of, it's an ideological question, she just told us. An ideological question that there has to be this clean break with the rest of the EU, no Iceland or Norway or Switzerland scenarios. Jeremy Stubbs, how do you think the rank and file of the Conservative Party feel? How split are they on this?
Oh, I think they're pretty split. Ideological breaks are always so much cleaner than breaks in reality. And this break, it's not going to be a clean break because it's going to take a long time to carry out. And ultimately, we haven't really had a precise definition of what a break would be. And that kind of definition will, of course, affect whoever is the person to be the next Prime Minister.
Steve Keen, what kind of a break would you like to see?
I want a break that rolls back the European Union because it's, rather than being something which has brought Europe together, the neoliberal economic policies that are embedded at the heart of it and the anti-democratic nature of those policies is actually leading to the fragmentation of Europe. And I was in favour of Brexit because I saw that as a milder wake-up call for Brussels to get them to realise they must reverse direction from the policies that have led to Europe being the most oppressed part of the global economy. But concretely,
how does the UK go about it? What does the UK do? Does it...
Well, all that's going to happen in terms of trade terms is that if we negotiate the same terms that America currently has with the European Union, England will face an average tariff of 2% on its goods. That's far less than the fall in the pound that's occurred right now, which I think is necessary, by the way, which will make English goods more competitive with the mainland. I think we can maintain free movement of professionals because Europeans are going to be the main beneficiaries of that. They want experience of working in an English language country because English is the language of business. In students, the same sort of story. Students want to study in an English language country, and England is close and has the capacity to absorb the number of students that have that interest. The one thing that's going to change, and it has to change, is the migration, the free migration, because at the same time as that put an enormous strain on the physical resources of the country, particularly the welfare resources, the Conservatives have been following a totally false austerity program which has reduced the resources below the level needed for the actual people of the country. So obviously that migration, we have been the escape valve for the failed economic policies of Europe, and that has to end, and Europe has to be forced to confront its own failures rather than shifting them offshore, which